Okay, folks, I'm recording this, should I say, pre-introduction video. I'm going to be uploading two videos to your respective playlists on YouTube. They're Reflective Practice Part 1 and Reflective Practice Part 2. These are important videos. They're important lectures. This introduction will be at the start of Reflective Practice Part 1. I will send you out a message on YouTube to refer to these, on Moodle, I beg your pardon. I'm using this as a common module or as a common presentation to a couple of modules on different programs. But suffice it to say that this is geared towards your Professional Development Part 2 piece of assessment. There are several modules I use this structure in, and in many of my modules I use reflective practice. It's a really important skill, and that's why I use it. It's part of your professional development. Let's put it this way: if I'd known this skill or had these techniques available to me when I was at your age, I would probably have made different career choices and probably would have done things differently while in different careers and so on. There's a lot written about reflective practice, and I'm sure you got some kind of an introduction on LDHE in first year. That was a pretty basic introduction. The stuff I'm going to present to you is far more contextualized. It's more advanced, not the most advanced versions of it. I have to keep it at the right level for you guys. And it's built on not just academic input, but more importantly on professional experience and background and context. And for that reason, it's important. There's a lot written about it. You will find many papers, journals, articles, books even on reflective practice. But fundamentally, when you strip away all the stuff, it really is simple. And it comes down to two simple statements that you ask of yourself. First is, what did I do previously? And how can I improve on the way I did what I did previously? So that implies that it's a process, and that's precisely what it is. So you have done stuff, you've been to meetings, you've been to presentations, you've worked on projects, you've done all sorts of stuff. And what we do in reflective practice, we literally stand back and say, if I had to do that all over again, how would I do it differently? How would I improve? What better ways could I have done the work that I've already done? So essentially what you're looking at is a continuous improvement approach on your professional development. And that's exactly what this is in your careers. Trust me, you will find tremendous value and use from this skill in your professional careers, whether it is, immediately after graduating right through until retirement. I'm still using it, for example, and so are many of my colleagues. Some of the best people I've ever worked with use variants of this process. And from an academic perspective, there are some models. There are a number of them. There are about 5, 6, maybe 7 decent models, but there's two that spring to mind, and two that I refer to in particular. One is Kolb's cycle, KOLB, experiential learning cycle, and the other is Gibbs cycle. Kolb has 4 elements to it, Gibbs has 5 elements to it. In any case, it's just a way of putting a structure or a process down to enable us to start using these processes to help us maximize our reflective practice opportunities or skills or experiences. And for that reason, as I said, I use it across a number of modules. Now, this introduction will be at the start of part 1. Go ahead and look at it immediately after that and go through the introduction, and then go straight on to part 2 to follow through on that. These will be uploaded onto your respective playlists, as I said, in YouTube. I will link them inside in Moodle, but I am giving you a heads up, use them, because they are critical to the brief in Professional Development Part 2. You're building on part one. You took your psychometric tests and all that sort of stuff and got a measure of yourself. And in part two, now I'm asking you to build on what you learned about yourself from the basics psychometric tests up to now. A short window, 10, 12 weeks. Usually not an awful lot happens, but at least it gets you to stand back and look at yourself. So sometimes you might find that, you found that. And now be very careful in this professional development part two. Do not use it as an opportunity to bitch and moan about people. Sometimes students do that, unfortunately. That's not what it is. You don't get marks for that. But if you stand back and say, well, I was dumped with all this work, I had to do this, I had to do that. Ask yourself, how did you allow yourself to get into that situation? And what would you do again the next time to avoid being dumped on? Because, mark my words, says Mark, if you allow people to dump on you, they will take advantage of you. And they'll let you, actually, he'll do it anyway, kind of thing. So, how do you learn to say no? How do you recognize the signals? What do you learn about yourself? Because you can, the most important person you can change is yourself. You can't change others. You can influence their habits. You can let them know about your habits. But you can change yourself and avoid getting into these difficult type situations. And more importantly, when you find things are going exceptionally well for you and your career is moving at pace, you still need to reflect and find out, what am I doing right? What is it that's about me as a professional that's enabled me to move so quickly through an organization or from job to job and so on? You need to understand fundamentally who you are, how you actually operate, and reflective practice. It's not an onerous process. You can be doing it out for a walk or a cycle or whatever, but just take time out to reflect and understand how you're improving yourself. And even to this day, I still do some of these psychometric tests just to see, am I in touch with how I think I am and so on. So I don't have to put up any of these facades or persona that I think people see in me. I am as I am, and that's what I want you to be. The emperor's no clothes for all intents and purposes. So cut out all of that crap so you're comfortable in your own skin. Reflective practice will enable you to be more confident and in your professions. So with that, folks, I'm going to leave this introduction. Go and look at the YouTube videos or lectures. They are important to you. If there's any skill that you take away from third level education, this is most certainly one of them that will benefit you throughout your careers. Trust me on that one. Okay. See you shortly. So, as I say, on the Late Late Show, without further ado, let's go jump around and do all the song and dancing that we have to do. Where am I going? Reflective practice. Let's get stuck into our presentation for tonight and talk through some of this. So what I'm going to start looking at, and obviously will be some models, the definitions, and some of the methods that we're going to start hitting into in terms of reflective practice and how we can the theories behind them, and some of the should we say the better writers and proponents of reflective practice. And this guy, David Boud, he's one of the reasons I include him is he's written some good material on reflection, turning experience into learning, and it would have been one of the core texts that we would have used when we were looking at work-based learning and action learning, which underpins essentially work-based learning and reflective practice in its totality, and how we actually learn and improve ourselves. And as he describes in our reflection, an important human activity, people recapture their experiences, think about it, mull over and evaluate it. And it is this working with experience that's important in learning. Okay, pretty straightforward and pretty straightforward. Yes.
Mark, can I see these slides?
You can't see the slides. Who can't see this?
No, you're in a little tiny box.
Hang on a second. Well, I'm looking at them. What?
Change your view to speaker view instead of gallery view.
It's why is this changing all of a sudden? This is I haven't done anything different since our last sessions.
Not yours, Mark. Whoever said they couldn't see you.
Hmm.
Neil, thanks.
Say again.
It's okay, Mark. We're started now, yeah.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. No, I haven't changed anything here. So because I tested everything except the audio before we started. So it should be fine now. Anyway, it's spiking a little bit in the red, which I'm not too happy about. But we'll see what it looks like in the recording. I can turn down the volume on. But anyway. Okay, where was I? Yeah, David Boud and his definition of reflective practice, and then we look at again Tate and Sills. They start to look at another definition. We learn through critical reflection by putting ourselves into the experience and exploring personal and theoretical knowledge to understand it and view it in different ways. Now, this is coming back to what I've been saying quite a lot of, and that's the critical perspective, looking at things from multiple perspectives to be able to understand and think, to use the expression, think outside the box. And this is what it's alluding to. So past experiences faced with new situations, new scenarios, how do we actually think? How do we use the reflective process to enable us to come up with possible solutions, possible alternatives or courses of actions and so on? But this is where we're beginning to move in. And there's some key words inside here. Critical reflection, and the experience of personal and theoretical knowledge to understand it and view it in different ways. So they're the key points through critical reflection. Then we start to move on and we talk about both the informal and the informal. Essentially, it's the formal and informal, or the other way around, informal and formal reflection. Bad title on the first part of the slide, but however. So informal reflection involves self-questioning. Develops our awareness of our own assumptions. So we make assumptions, we think of something and we stand back and we say, well, geez, am I right about that? Is that good? Is that bad? And they're the basic kind of assumptions. And I'm not even going to mention, for the time being anyway, all the different biases and so on and so forth. But yeah, we have this kind of instinctive reaction to informal reflection. So where we question, we might think, we might be some way hesitant in a course of action, and that's this informal. We don't quite know why we, as a practitioner, why we want to take this course of action or choose that course of action. Not until we begin to do more deeper critical reflection. And then we look at some of these, as we say, the formal reflections and formal mechanisms. I move out of the way of the slides now that you can see them. Draws on research and theory, so it provides guidance and frameworks for practice. And that's what we're really getting into now. What kind of frameworks and what kind of methodologies do we use or can we use to help us to reflect? And here's this is the stinger in the tail, really. I mean, we're going through all of these reflective theories and practices and so on. And at the end of it all, you say to yourself, why do we have to go through all of this? What makes sense? And that's really what the challenge is, to give you a different perspective as to why you do these things, the reasons why you think differently. Why do I make these rash assumptions? Are they justifiable? Are they legitimate? And now when you're armed with a reflection, you might not be so quick to jump into a course of actions. You might now think, I'll think about this, I'll critically reflect on this action or in this action, and then make a more, to use one of those expressions, an informed judgment. And that's essentially what you're trying to do in all of these situations. So we need to be able to take maybe one or two breaths. I'm not familiar. If you're familiar with some breathing techniques, when you want to relax and so on, or if you're under pressure, if you're running a marathon or cycling a stupid bike, Jesus, I always have to get it in every night. But I know myself when I'm struggling going up a hill and I'm gasping for air, and so what I do is I breathe. I'll take a double breath, and you get a bit more oxygen in it. It's basically to keep myself alive, But essentially, but that's the kind of technique, So if you think of it from that perspective, that we're taking a double breath each time we make a decision or do something, and so on and so forth, we're giving ourselves a little bit more time to think and think things. Now, as I said, these happen extremely quickly. In milliseconds, your ideas and things are bouncing around inside in your head. But given a few extra milliseconds, we might not notice it, but you'd be surprised how quickly these things happen in reality. So some of the models of reflection, and here's one of the first ones. This is a Dewey's 5-stage. Now, I will be recommending particular ones towards the end of this, but nevertheless, I'd be doing you an injustice if I didn't at least give you a repertoire of different models to look at. But here in Dewey's model, he used a 5-stage approach. He said, we identify the problem that's perplexing us, or that we feel is a problem. We observe and refine the identified problem to create a fuller understanding. So we're mulling over, to use one of the earlier definitions. Then we develop a hypothesis, or an hypothesis, depending on your grammar, or an understanding about the problem itself, its origins and possible solutions. So we begin to think, what happened, how it happened, and what's a possible solution. So that's quite a broad stage or step in his model, because you're doing essentially two things at the same time. You're thinking of the context, the problem itself, and possible solutions. So you're virtually thinking in parallel at that point. And then we subject the hypothesis to scrutiny and reasoning. So we come up with our brain thinks of one of this course of action, and immediately we invert on ourselves and start to think of, do devil's advocate for all intents and purposes, as I mentioned in prior talk, back towards ourselves to stop us. I just need to turn off my phone here. Sorry about that. Come in here, you clown. And so we when we're looking at these possible solutions, we're literally, we pick one, and again very quickly we'll go back to step 3 and we'll hypothesize, is this solution correct, are there other alternatives, and so on. And then on stage 5 we test a hypothesis or understanding in practice. So when we have reasoned out one of the hypotheses, then say we're reasonably happy with this course of action, you go and do it. And then what happens? You start it all over again. If it doesn't work, you start to reflect again. Why didn't it work? What went blah, 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 blah. So it's, again, these are iterative cycles. Each iteration gives us a new knowledge. Okay, and some writers refer to this as a meta knowledge or a metacognition. Now, Sean, and this is one particular writer that I like myself, and again, I do have his books here in front of me, actually, and not to make a liar out of myself. Here's the very book. Here you are, up close and personal. Get the shine off it. Reflective Practitioner: How Professionals Think in Action. That was a set reading piece, and I still have it, and it is quite good because it's about professionals. It's not about academics. And I'll come back to that another time. So reflection in action concerns about thinking something whilst engaged in doing it. Okay, having a feeling about something and practicing according to that feeling. So this model celebrates the intuitive and artistic approaches that can be brought to uncertain situations. So in other words, we begin to come up, dream up alternative ways of solving problems, become really creative about solving problems. Do you remember I mentioned this process of design thinking? And in that process, how I talked about at the start of design thinking, how we use empathy and emotional intelligence, which is the key driver, and how we came up with solutions to the public toilets and the pram. Do you remember? Did I mention this to you before? Yeah, some people are nodding yes, so good. I don't have to repeat myself. God knows I do a lot of that these days. So the whole idea was, we understood the problems, and then we said, hey, is there some way different we can do this? Let's try and really break the mold, scrap traditions, scrap this, that, and the other thing, and go. And that's what he's alluding to. Where you really get enjoyment out of coming up with the solutions that are novel, innovative, and so on. That all those hallmarks, and you do actually feel that level of satisfaction when you do come up with an alternative solution. And many years ago when I was writing software code and coming up, and we were using expressions to each other's software when we were writing this, and say, that's an elegant piece of code, or that's a lovely piece of software, and it's because of the way we built the algorithms, which essentially software is, how quickly or how efficiently we got them to work, and so on. So they were the kind, elegant software, for heaven's sake, where would you get it? But they were the kind of words that were being used, and the kind of indicative of saying, yeah, there's real creative satisfaction out of coming up with a piece of code that did something that might be replacing something already there, or coming up to solving a new feature or implementing a new feature, and so on. So this is shown, and I particularly like now because he talks about reflection in action, and also he talks about reflection on action. So in action is literally while you're in the middle of something, so you can be thinking of stuff and changing your mind as you're doing it, because there's new micro issues cropping up that you want to say, well, okay, that wasn't in the original plan. I need to adjust for this and then adjust for that. So that's where we're kind of stepping in and out of these two roles. You're doing and you're thinking, and doing and thinking, and that's essentially the reflection in action. Whereas the other one is we've done something and you stop and you think, and where we're reflecting on action. It's more of it's almost like an historical approach. So we've done it, now can we do it better, so on and so on. And of course, here's my favorite guy of all, and one of my favorite models of all times, well, for the most part anyway, and time is short. Kolb's experiential learning, and we mentioned this before, where you have the observations, the abstract conceptualization, the active experimentation, and then the concrete. So, and without going through this in detail again, but that's essentially, we observe, we look, we take in, we analyze, we think about things, coming up with possible solutions, we try them out, and we see what we've learned when we're trying it out. When we know it works or it doesn't work, we've learned something, and it goes around that cycle all the time. Now, here's the interesting little twist in this. That's how you as an individual would go through the process, pretty well defined. But that can also work when as a link into the Secchi model, for example. So you might be reflecting on an observation, and you might make it explicit by talking to somebody. I'm thinking about this possible solution, and they'll feed into you their opinions or comments or observations likewise. And not only are you making an abstract conceptualization of your own observations, but those of others as well. Hence, this is why this model is so powerful. When you link the two of those, and you get the conceptual understanding of how what started out as relatively simple becomes layered with complexities as such. But really, it's just the way we communicate. We just feed in, and we have a higher order of goals. So it goes beyond the ego, or as in by definition, the person, the single person ego. It goes beyond the one single person. It goes into the group, and the group takes on its own personality. Whether it is 2, 3, or 23 people in the group, that becomes an entity, and as an entity as such, goes through this cycle as well. So we try things out, we work things out. We're all sharing at different levels and experiment. Some people in the group might be doing the experimentation and feeding back and so on. That's how this Secchi model laps over and back between individuals within the group as such. So that's why I like looking at these models, and how, for their simplicity, they can be morphed into something that's rather complex in from multiple dimensions, but it need not necessarily be that we don't need to think of the complexity, because these are happening in simple short steps as such. So models of reflection, learning in the cycling, we have the concrete experimentation all the ways down again to active experimentation, or concrete experience down to experimentation. So that's called, going back to 1984, as I said, one of the preferred models. Now, again, he would be the preferred model for your final piece of assessment. Now, some people have asked as well about examples and so on. What do you think? You think I'm talking to somebody here? There's nobody here. It's just me talking to the ground. Do I? I started a document today for you guys, and in it gives some simple examples. It talks about reflective practice and all that. It's only about 6 or 7 pages of a document, but there are some examples of, insofar as what's a shallow piece of reflection, what's a deep piece of reflection, what's a medium piece of reflection, what's a critical piece of reflection, what they kind of look like. So there's some samples inside there, and I'll post them up onto Moodle once I've edited and finally fine-tuned the document. It's pretty straightforward. There's some stuff up there already anyway, but this was from this year, I think it was the material. Not that it makes any difference. So if we look at Booth's model, experiential learning. So we return to an event, incident or experience, and we record it. So we go back and think, and we look at stuff that we've done, and we take note. It could be that evening, it could be 2 hours after the event, it could be several weeks. It doesn't matter when, but essentially we go back to something that happened in the past. And then we consider it in detail at an emotional and cognitive level. So how did we feel during that instance? So let's take an example. You had to fire somebody because it's a straightforward emotion. It would be highly unlikely, if not improbable, that you would feel absolutely cold or feel total enjoyment out of doing something like that. That would be pretty... It's possible. If it is possible, I suggest you start taking some medication, because you would not be normal. But in the general context of things, yes, you're going to have some level of discomfort in terms of the emotion, because invariably you will find yourself in their shoes and saying, how am I going to break this news to Mark? I have to tell him, that his contract is terminated. How am I going to do this? And put myself, how would he like to hear the information? How would he? Well, not that he'd like to hear the information, but how would you think he'd receive it? What way would what would be the best way? So you're putting yourself in, and they're quite complex emotions to try and assume what other person's emotions are and so on. But nevertheless, they are highly charged. Or you have some kind of a conflict situation with 2 other team members. I mean, you're quite fine per se. But 2 team members are in conflict. How do you resolve that as the team leader or manager and so on? Again, it'll be highly emotionally charged, and you have to come in there, and invariably we have different attachments to different people within our groups, and I know it's not fair to say that we treat everyone the same. We don't in reality. You'll have some preferences in part to one individual, which will differ to somebody else, and so on and so forth. So those kind of emotional states, and how we actually are aware of these. So how do you actually balance these out when you're dealing with the 2 individuals? That's what we're alluding to here. Then we have to reevaluate the event in the light of experience, knowledge, and experimentation. So seek to understand the meaning of the experience. So what did it actually mean for us when we had to diffuse a conflict situation? Or what did it mean for us in terms of our feelings and emotions when we had to terminate somebody's contract, or and so on, or put somebody onto a PIP? Jeez, never forget the old PIPs. Jeez, they're a great piece of stuff. Anyway, and then we plan for what you might change. So when we think back and how do we feel, So we might think of, maybe we were highly emotionally charged ourselves and said, that's the last time, I'm not going to get that heavily involved, or I'm not going to do this, I'm not going to do that, and I should have done this, and the way I came across, I was a weak, or I was strong, or that. But in your own understanding now, here's the real fun in it, is how do you think others would have perceived you? Now, this is something that's happened ages ago, perhaps last week, yesterday, and you encountered that experience and you had emotions and attached to that experience. Not only you evaluating how you're feeling, but you're also trying to evaluate the emotions of how others might be feeling towards you, in the way you handled the particular situation. Are they going to be accurate? Depends on how emotionally or intelligent or connected, not how much. That's the wrong way of putting it, but how aware you are of other people's emotions at the time. Were you able to absorb those along with your own, so as you get a fuller picture of exactly the emotional atmosphere at that particular time? Now we have Booth's experiential learning again. So he goes through these stages, return to the experience, describe the experience, and then notice what happened, how you felt, and what you actually did, not as a consequence of how you feel, but what you actually did in that during that experience. And then secondly, attend to feelings. So acknowledge negative feelings, but don't let them be form a barrier. So that's the critical one. You will have negative feelings, and certainly in the examples that I use, such as conflict or termination and so on, you will have some levels of negative feelings. Or it could be your own appraisal system. You'll have negative feelings because you might have heard stuff back from your boss, manager, that you weren't altogether too pleased about, but you didn't defend yourself, or you didn't present your case strong enough, and so on, and you'll be coming up kicking yourself, saying, Jesus, I should have said this, I should have said that. But think of the feelings that are going on with those thoughts and those statements that you're making to yourself. And then reevaluate the experience. So connect the ideas and the feelings of the experience to those you had on reflection. So again, when you go back, how did you feel when you were thinking? You know what the instance was. How were you actually feeling? This is the whole critical thing, because through all of these models, one of the biggest barriers are enablers to effective reflection is emotion. It's very hard. I mean, right now, is it a good time or bad time for reflective practice? I don't know. I actually don't know. Personally speaking, I could find it's probably not a good time, because I'm being overwhelmed, and I try to put up the blinkers with all the bullshit that's going on around in news and numbers and this, that, and the other thing, and the stupidity and so on of characters, and I haven't even mentioned Trump yet. Just did. But the point about we're being overwhelmed with all of this stuff, so it's feeding. And if you listen to news stations, I mean, I won't mention particular stations, but some of them just keep repeating the same. Every couple of hours, when there's a new presenter coming onto their program, they start the same banter about this, that, and the other thing, and you say, I mean, God Almighty, does this go on all day? So that can have raise our anxiety levels, essentially, and of course this is all predicated by the fact that we're in lockdown for all intents and purposes. So now is it a good time? Our emotions, unless we're able to control them and stand back, and as I said, when we think deeply about all this sort of stuff, when we're able to stand back and take double breaths, perhaps not one breath, but at least take a breath and distance ourselves from all of that, and that takes a bit of practice. In that context, I find these times not so much challenging, but well, to a point, challenging as far as how well can I put up these barriers to free my head from this stuff that's going on, to allow me to be able to reflect and think and do things differently. I do find that, for example, when I was looking at some of this stuff again today for tonight, I said, I'm not altogether too happy with this material, so I'll research a little bit more, and did, and pulled out a couple of more videos and so on. So at least I didn't have any radio on. I'm up here in the studio office. Jeez. And so I have peace and quiet to a large extent, except for that bleeping fire alarm or smoke detector or whatever it is now. Anyway, so reevaluating our experience and consider the options, and then again learning added by Johns. This is the stage 5 to Booth's element. How do we feel about the experience? Could I have dealt with it better with the situations as such? And what have I learned from the experience? So again, just thinking about it. And now, the interesting point about that is that when we've done an in-depth critical reflection on the experience or the event or whatever it was, we build what's known as a metacognition. So we have, if this happens again, this is how I'll react if I'm in that same situation. The chances are of you being in the same situation are slim to none, but there will be a lot of similarities. So that metacognition doesn't go to waste. It actually it stays there in this repertoire of possible course of actions, and you'll dip into them because you'll have a whole range of these metacognitions for types of situations that I'll pick this one from that shelf and that one from there. I'll mix these two together and you form another layer of possible actions and responses. So models of reflection. So John's 10 C's. Okay, I'm not going to go through every one of these. So commitment, contradiction, conflict, challenge, catharsis, creation, connection, caring, congruence, and constructing. Catharsis, work through negative feelings. Okay, so why were they negative? Blah blah blah. What caused them to be negative? How would you turn the negativity into positive and in a metacognitive state as you move forward? So move beyond the old self to a novel alternative. So change your attitude, change the way you're doing things, modify certain parts of your behavior, certain parts of your reaction. I would have been one for, throwing in my tuppence worth a number of years ago, or if I was in a particularly heated argument, I used to be saying, well, but yeah. Now, not at all. I just sit back and, I would say sometimes in an argument, silence can be the best form of offense, but and it does actually work. So you can sometimes say nothing is better than saying anything. And I've seen in a couple of instances where I've gotten into a bit of a scrape, with colleagues or managers, and the more I said nothing, which is a bit of a contradiction, the more I said nothing at all, the more infuriated they became. And sooner or later, they're going to make some serious screw up, literally, and they do. They come out with something, or they come out with some insult and so on. So that's all you need. They come out with some remark that's not well founded or supposition, and literally their whole argument falls apart. Then, so again, because I reflected, I said, well, in that situation previously, I reacted. I took the bait and I started to challenge the issues. Next time, I just keep my mouth, and it can be murder. It can be absolute hell to try and keep your mouth zipped up when someone is having a right go at you for whatever reason, so on. But patience. It's that's why I say Sun Tzu's Art of War, great read. Now I'm beginning to sound like Trump now. Beautiful. Help me. So, connect new insights with the new world of practice, and then realize desirable practice. So what you'd like to expect, and what kind of, and remember again that when you're thinking of these course of actions or these outcomes and so on, that you can actually change your emotional state. If you take that example of where I reflected on where I had head-to-heads, and then I said, next time around, I'm going to not respond in that kind of behavior. I'm going to take this course of action. You will actually, it's weird as it may sound, but you will actually change your emotions. Jesus, I'm going to think this, and you'll actually feel a lot more positive about yourself, because you've chosen that will be the course. This is the metacognition. This is the course of action I will use in future if I'm in that type of situation. And the likelihood is, in those kind of situations, when you're in a particular type of bus, in the case of toxicity in organizations, you have this and so on. And if you feed to toxic leaders, they'll thrive on your conflicting response because they have the power and they can do. But if you don't respond and if you don't say, it frustrates them more and more and more. And over time, it won't happen to just you. It'll happen to somebody else and somebody else and somebody else. And before you know it, the organization notes that, yeah, Mark has upset so many people across the organization with his toxic behavior. Well, not me personally, but I'm using myself as the example. But then it becomes a simple fait accompli insofar as that, I mean, these 5 or 6 people can't be wrong. He's saying one thing, but these 5 or 6 are reacting and doing this. So there's obviously an issue with that one person. That's why when we talk about toxic leadership, I'm sure Dave might have covered this element with you, or will do at some stage. It's one of the interventions or mechanisms to be able to manage and cope with a toxic environment as such. Okay, I went slightly off tangent there anyway, but it gets the message across, I think. And then this is my probably second favorite model after Kolb, and this is Gibbs' reflective cycle. And there's not a lot more to it except that in this case, Gibbs introduces this element here explicitly, which is the feeling side. The rest, as you can see, you evaluate you take the analysis and hypothesize and you conclude and you go off and you form an action plan. And in some ways, this is very it's kind of similar to the plan, do, check, act, and you stick in feelings into that qualities cycle as such, But essentially, it brings out one of the important points, which is what you were thinking and feeling at that particular time during your reflection or during the instance and so on. Okay. So the reflective process, taken at once. So we have the experiences, which are locked. Then we have the reflective process itself. And as you can see, we're dipping in and out of the past experiences. I'll just get out of the way of the diagram. So you're dipping in and out of the past behaviors, the ideas you had and the feelings, and you're returning to the current situation. You're attending to the feelings. You're reevaluating your experiences and how you do things differently. And then you move forward. What are the outcomes? You'll have new perspectives, changes in behavior. And by way of example, I changed my behavior in a particular toxic situation. And but I knew I was expecting a particular outcome, and that's why the change of behavior. And so I found that myself that actually this doesn't work too badly at all. By keeping my mouth shut a little bit more, I can absorb a bit more information and be a little bit more informed. And when I do make a comment, it does become a little bit more, it carries more weight because I've slowed down the way I do things and the way I respond and react. So it's and it's probably an age thing as well. I don't know, but anyway, it worked like that. So, and then we were committed to taking a particular course of action. These are the outcomes as a result, because we think about things, we reflect on those. Our reflection is the thinking on past events and instances and so on, and that gives us a new momentum or impetus to want to do things differently. And oftentimes we do things radically differently to avoid some of the past. So these barriers, as they call it, practical barriers, sees that to reflect effectively on your experience, you should actively set aside part of your working day to reflect and analyze. Okay, you need time. So a little bit of time management. And I get to mention cycling twice in the same night. Yeah, but that's when I reflect. And I didn't do much reflecting yesterday when I was out in freaking 40-kilometer-an-hour gusts of wind and pouring rain down, and then getting a puncture 5 kilometers from home. I did some reflecting then, I can tell you. It wasn't that language I was using, you'd be quite sure, but there's a few more profanities that I'm professionally I'm not allowed to say. But in any case, that finding time, literally, that's all it is. It could be a case when you're driving to work or driving home from work in the evening or whatever, or if you're in lockdown, going out to the garden shed, leave the bottle of wine in the freezer or fridge. Don't just take time out, basically, But that's important. It doesn't have to be every day. It can be, a couple of times a week and so on. But really critical, find some me time to indulge yourself into some reflection. and particularly in a work context. And we can do it generically, but more precisely, we're primarily focused on professional development here. Psychological barriers to reflection. So fear of judgment, fear of criticism, being closed to feedback, defensive and professional arrogance. God knows the last one. There's a few of those around, all right. Those that are believe they know it all and dare anyone criticize them and so on and so forth. And that's a problem because that level of arrogance, as I said, in true leadership, you must know the fine line between confidence and arrogance. And once you cross that line, you're missing out on phenomenal opportunities. And by that I mean being aware enough to be able to accept criticism from others and value, critical analysis from others. I don't mean that they're calling you all sorts under the sun because you're the boss, and not that type of criticism. If you've proposed a course of action and so on, and if you weren't confident enough in your role as a leader to be able to take critical feedback from the team members, then you're missing out on some serious development, not only for yourself, but for the team and ultimately for the organization itself. So professional arrogance, that's the context. And when we talk about the psychological barriers, we believe because we exist, we are kind of thing, But so humility being one of the characteristics that is most admirable in people, to know when they don't know it all, in other words. And that's one of the key points about reflective practice, that we need to know what we don't know. Okay. And then the fear of judgment, of course, and that can be in the novice or early stages, as such that if you say something, you don't want to, and this possibly the second one as well, the fear of criticism, that you're new to the organization or new to the team. You do have those understandable those fears, because again you might lack some confidence as such. But again, if you're reflecting effectively, you can mitigate some of these fears, because you say, well, I've assimilated as much of this information from the experts or the more knowledgeable people, and I'm about to say something. Therefore, you have a little bit more confidence because it's pretty much in line with what the situation requires, or the solution might require. That's not to say that even though you might have something totally radical, as long as you qualify it or can qualify it with a reasonable justification. Sometimes you might just say, well, we could do it this way. And people look at you, what are you talking about? If we've done this and we've done that and we've done this, and we need to look at it maybe from this perspective. So it gives your comment or your input validity, that you're able to back it up and so on and so forth. And that's how we get over it, if we think and absorb. So again, this is the combination of this Secchi model and reflective practice, and your ability to have to combine those extremely effectively. They can reduce this level of fear, or and of course the fear of criticism if you say something. Again, as the leader, you have to be very careful to manage these situations such that the novices and the beginners do have an opportunity to contribute without fear of criticism as such. So creating the environment, that's again very important leadership function, I would say. And then being close to feedback. Some people just don't like getting any feedback as such, because they believe not quite so much the professional arrogance, but do you know who are the worst in this actually, and fall into the professional arrogance, and that academics. Oh Jesus. Yeah, honest to God, I'm recording this, and mother of God, if any of my colleagues see it, oh jeez. When I was doing my Viva, doing my presentation with, and I told you this before, with the panel of other professors at the time, and the way I approached it was, I said, right, I'll do the Julius Caesar's, Mark Antony's soliloquy approach. You remember that? Friends, Romans, and countrymen, I come to bury Caesar, not to praise him. blah, 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 blah. And by the end of his soliloquy, he had them all eaten out of his hand, saying that, that Caesar was the greatest thing since or before Trump. But anyway, I took the same type of approach. And the reason why, because I looked at who was on the panel and said, he's an expert in that area, he's an expert in that area, and he's an expert there, and so on. So I knew, in other words, Sun Tzu, I practiced what I preached. Know your enemy. Not that there were enemies, but know who I was dealing with. So I did my homework on the guys, and I knew that if I talked in his area, because he is a professor in there, and he's this, that, and the other thing, he's the expert, and therefore for me to talk about that sort of stuff would be a hint of professional arrogance. So I need to just touch in his area and touch in that other person, and then bring them out of their comfort zone. And I did. I took them way out of their comfort zone because the Mark Antony approach. I came in to talk about stuff, but then I brought them into my area, into my domain, and started to talk about that stuff. And this is exactly where this situation kind of describes the bordering on professional arrogance from these guys, was that they didn't want to how to say, appear ignorant of a subject, so they didn't question. Because they didn't know the stuff, they didn't want to question and so on. Which was bar one of them. In fairness to the guy, he was a little bit more. I haven't understood that, and this is new to me. Can you inform me a little bit more of this? And then I could see him. See where you're coming from now, and so on and so forth. That's essentially how we break down some of these psychological barriers as such. So bridges, non-judgmental support, mentor and manager type of approach, feeling safe enough, or we may use expedient learning and do what we expect us to get us through, and so on and so forth. Expedient learning. So an interesting concept, and something that I particularly like, and it's I use the name just-in-time learning, a kind of expedient learning, and not so much to get us through on a superficial level, but we learned stuff that we need to know right now, kind of thing. Otherwise, it's you can spend a lot of time researching and doing stuff, and God knows I've been there, so I'm quite sure I know what I'm talking about. And I say you go down rabbit holes. By way of example, if you're looking at stuff on the internet and you click on a link and you look at this and say, oh yeah, that's interesting, and before you know it, you're gone about several pages away from what you actually originally started. And that's quite common. We all fall into that kind of trap. So it's, staying focused and I not only need to know about reflective practice right now. I don't need to read all these other different things and tangential papers or web pages or whatever the case may be. And look for a role model, as I say here, a mentor who reflects on their own practice. And oh God, who would you find? Good question, actually. To myself, who would I look to as a mentor? It was probably some of the professionals I've worked with over the years, and the way their demeanor, how they actually behaved inside in meetings and so on, and you could see that their mind was racing as such, and as such you could see the way they act. So without even having to ask them to be a mentor, they became a mentor of mine. And that's why I talk about in leadership, be careful who you model yourself on, that you don't pick the village idiot as such, but that somebody, so you look at attributes, and sometimes you'll see these types of attributes. You see someone who's a bit more thoughtful and thinking, or even the way he handles some junior person in the organization. You might say, geez, so and so, Jim is great. The way he brings people under his arm or under his wing as such, and brings them through. Or you might have seen him bring people from zero to heroes, and he working in the background. So you can identify those type of people and say, they're really positive characters. So they become a role model for you, and you try to emulate, not copy, but emulate and the way they're doing it, but you do it yourself, make it your own. knowledge of as many methods as possible of different reflective practice. So know all so again, no one size fits all. I do say I have a preference for Kolb and so on, but Gibbs isn't so bad because he introduces emotions. I would like Kolb's, not because he doesn't mention emotions, but I already know about emotions, and therefore I want to go straight into thinking. But I do know that feelings have a major part in it. That's why I have a little bit more of a lean, again, because of my own disposition, that I have a lean more towards show me the numbers, give me the facts, give me the details. So a little bit more of a scientific type mind, I suppose, is one way of describing it. And as a consequence, I say sometimes decisions have to be devoid of emotion, but I'm always cognizant of the emotion behind it, because I do know when things succeed, I do get a great satisfaction of knowing that if it's helped somebody else or if it's helped me and so on. So as again I said, there are these different models. John's 10 C's. No, if you fancy, go after it, knock yourselves out, but not for me. It's just it can be it's just too cumbersome. Again, because I like simplicity. Okay, and 10 C's. I mean, do you think I could rattle those 10 C's off again? No, I open the world, other than catharsis. And then as many opportunities as possible for engaging in reflection, in groups and pairs. Now, this is one of the other things where we're not talking about just your own self-reflection, but when you're working with people, and that's essentially where you're beginning to look for feedback, and you bounce ideas off people, and you get commentary back, criticism, positive and negative, and so on and so forth. You get this. It's a two-way street. So it essentially what it does is it either reaffirms your train of thought or reinforces your emotional state at that particular time, or not. And the real key to this, I mean, I saw something today. We had there was a talk on resilience, and so for crying out loud, here we go again, the babysitting brigade. But essentially, what we're looking at is how quickly you can pick yourself up. Somebody will say something to you, you don't agree with it, you'll feel a little bit deflated and so on. So, but how quickly can you reinflate yourself? But have you thought about this? So getting that momentum going again. And of course, as you can see here, it's all about time and energy. How much time you have and how you motivate yourself. And I talked to you before about leadership qualities, and one of them being drive, and how you drive yourself to want to do things. And that's really how your self-motivational approach, so to speak. So the methods of reflections, and so a narrative is a story of an experience or event. So written in the first person, I felt this, I thought that. Now here's the interesting part of this. In reflective practice, when you're talking about the thing, do you remember Agent Smith out of the Matrix? Yeah, the guy that was always reappearing and multiplying himself. And there's one great scene where they're fighting in the schoolyard, and he looks around and he says, I need more me. Me. And that's really what it is. But we have a problem here. Most of us, when we're writing about ourselves, find it very difficult to write about ourselves in the first person. I felt this and I did that, I did the other thing, and so on and so forth. It's like, I mean, even the HR brigade, I know someone is going to bounce off me for that. Say, what's wrong with the HR brigade? An awful lot. No, it does not. No, they're fine as long as they're in the other building. No, Jesus. Sorry. Where was it? Yeah. God, where was I going with this? Yes. From the HR perspective, some years ago, they're talking about, your CVs and so on and so forth. Don't be writing, don't be using too much I, and so on. But the reality of it is, who else are you going to be talking about? I even had more than once. I've actually had students talking about, when I'm writing this reflective practice, or this reflective piece, can I write it in the third person and use the spell checker, search and find and replace in Word to change it to I afterwards? I said, you're freaking kidding me, It's they were that, how to say, uncomfortable about writing about themselves, and understandably, people do find a little bit of embarrassment, maybe, or might feel that it's arrogance coming out to be able to write. But it is a real challenge to be able to do so. I felt this, I did that, I did the other thing, and so on and so forth. And if you were looking down to it, you say, I, yeah. But who else are you talking about? Well, that's certainly the way I look at it. I mean, you're not talking about your granny or grandpa or whatever, anyway, or the dog that died last week because of the fireworks or something like that, You're talking about yourself. And you do have to literally wear your heart on your sleeve. There's no, how to say, it's not correct to say, but I'll say it now. There's no right or wrong narrative in this respect, because they're your instances, they're your reflections, and so all I can do is guide you on to writing something that you will find meaning and depth in. I can't say that your experience is rubbish and that's a bad interpretation of your experience. I mean, name it, Jesus. Who do you think I am? Who do I even think I am? To come out with, you can't. It's extremely subjective. So writing in the first person, learner centered, obviously, and allows the learner's voice to be heard. So you as a person, and enables links to be made between the personal and professional development. So, can we separate the personal from the professional? Not really. You're essentially you're the one, the same person, for crying out loud. So, stuff happens inside and work. So Mark from 9 to 5 is essentially the same Mark from 5 to 9 o'clock the following morning. I might not be thinking about work all the time. Well, not all the time, a lot of the time. But nevertheless, you do need to know where the buttons to switch off as such, And you do know that you will have to behave slightly differently in different contexts. But that's all it is. There's no professional and personal me as such. If you look at yourselves from as a person and an individual, you're a continuum. There's no there are switch off points, but they're not switch off persons. Okay, and then they can be shared to allow deeper reflection. So these narratives you can. So what essentially what we're talking about there is that you can share your thoughts and your ideas and your feelings with somebody else, and that's why it enables you to. So somebody might prompt. They might say something, might say a word, might give a sentence, and so on and so forth. And that's where the likes of the psychologists, counselors, and so on and so forth. That's what they're tweaking. They're listening to what you're saying, and they're picking up on certain words and nuances and so on and so forth, and they're able to tweak them. And in a professional context, and from business and leadership, we become our own kind of psychologists, and so far as that. We use neuro-linguistic programming, so we can say certain words and do certain things and behaviors to influence professional behaviors inside the workplace and so on and so forth. So methods of we can use a reflective journal. So again, it's a straightforward reaction documented, different ways that you might look at it. How the experience links with other experiences. Interesting point. Are there similarities or not? Might be totally dissimilar, but you might have the same emotions. How can you understand the experience in light of theory? So if you apply Kolb's and say, well, this is the experience now. Can I break it down into Kolb's cycle, for example, and say, this is how I observed it. This was my expected outcome, but this is actually what happened. So why did this happen? So now, because you're trying to retrofit maybe the experience into the Kolb cycle, for example. Now you're delving into the levels of second and third loop learning. So you retrofit and say, well, God, if I had thought about it, then I would have had a different outcome to the meeting that already happened. So you see, your strategies are changed. So now you're armed with a totally different view or perspective, more than likely. Okay, or more than likely. So then you need to know, for example, what you've learned in the situation and what you need to learn. Clearly, in other words, what we know and what we don't know, and how do we go about knowing what we don't know, learning, of course, and then how you might achieve your identified learning goals, and then so what do you need to do to achieve particular objectives. Now, most of the literature around all of this stuff, however, is being hijacked by learning institutions, colleges, and so on, and academics inside there, where they talk about reflection on learning and reflection on learning and theory and so on, and there's not sufficient or there's not enough material evidently available for pure professional development, the stuff that I'm trying to go through here as such. So I'm trying to take it out of the academic realms and say, this is how we actually can use this as professionals in our respective careers. And one of the areas that, now I'm not going to show it tonight, I don't think I will. What time have we got? We're at 20 to 10 already, and I have another 5 slides to do. And at the way I talk, sure, we could be here till 12 o'clock. But what I'll do is I probably work them into the next second half, part 2 of this presentation. But essentially, it's actually from the nursing profession and how they've adapted some of this reflective practice. And I was impressed about the way they were doing it. I said, okay, it's been done for nursing and so on and so forth. And therefore, it can apply, the way they're doing it can apply in other professional development without going into this, the academic realms of learning and teaching and how we should reflect as teachers and this, that, and the other thing, because that's not the case. I mean, this stuff was around for professionals long before the academics got their hands on it. And it's as simple as that. When I was originally studying cost and management accountancy, I was doing exactly this stuff, reflective journals. I used to have to take notes of, fill in a journal as to what I had done, what types of accounts I had worked on, how did I solve the various problems, what were the problems that came up, in cost variances and yield accounting, for example, what kind of issues were cropping up there, and where does that fit inside in the theory that I should be learning at the same time and all. So I was keeping a journal, and that was my first exposure. That was back in 1979 time frame, 1979-80, and but even before that, scientists were always taking notes, so they're writing stuff down and they look at their experiments and they're reflecting on this. So it's long before the academics got their freaking hands on it, I mean, this stuff was going around, and so professionals had been using this in a long time, and I just don't see enough material written about it in that context, or in that, should we say, in those realms, to make it a little bit more palatable and meaningful enough for professionals, for people that want to excel in their careers as such, other than teachers and nurses. Anyway, so methods of reflection and critical incident. So a critical incident is an incident that is in some way insignificant to an individual recounting it. So you should record what the situation was, what you did in it, and what happened as a result of your actions, and a reflection on the situation or event, and so on. So critical incidents are an important incident. Doesn't again, critical, what you thought, what stands out in your head, what would have had most impact for you, both emotionally and professionally as such. So they're the ones that we can. But then over time, as you become more fluent in the use of reflective practice, you can look at the lesser critical instances and start to really fine tune, and you will start to notice links between the least critical and most critical type of instances, and you start to notice certain behaviors and certain reactions from yourself, and then you say, well, okay, it's the way I'm feeling or the way I'm reacting to these different situations. I must now investigate perhaps the feelings and what caused that. So it's almost like going back, were you slapped when you were a child across the back of the head? Is the root cause of your anger, and you're 50 years of age because your parents slapped you across the ears or something like that. No, I'm not going down those routes, but in a manner of speaking, that's what we're trying to assess for ourselves, so that we can improve the way we're doing things. Okay. So the importance of reflection enables us to be conscious of our potential for bias and discrimination. Okay. I mentioned this before, 250 odd different biases And I think I have a document up there, or I might have mentioned something. I think there's something up in Moodle there, probably worth looking at as well to see what kind of a biases, the conscious biases, or even the unconscious, comatose biases, as I call them. But anyway, so make the best use of knowledge available. So the things you know, what you have at your hands at the moment, and is this the best? Is this the best way we're using things, or can we use it more effectively, more efficiently? If you're using particular forms, if you're using a piece of software, am I getting the best out of it? For example, does it do more than I already think it can do? Probably. So again, how do we know what we don't know? You have to go in and experiment, try it out, and say, oh, it'll do this, it'll do that. For example, okay, you see the rigmarole I go through when we're starting off our sessions here, and the jump throughs and all that. Well, I have a whole host and raft of these things, and I'm fine tuning the way I might just change them now just to break the monotony for the next few weeks. But I'm constantly going on to learn. I said there must be a better way, and so on and so forth. Though, yeah, there was one for a particular instance where I wanted. What was I trying to do actually? Oh yeah, trying to do something. I think. Can I do it now? Actually. No, I can't. I'll wait till I go back to the main screen. But a thing called a stinger, where I just put a piece of information on the screen, and we're going through this piece of software and I'm making it really difficult. I said, geez, I need to get Adobe After Effects and this, that, and the other. I said, oh, geez, this is really complex altogether. There must be an easier way. So I did. I found a way of using just 3 PowerPoint slides, 2 identical slides, and 1 with a piece of writing on it. Put them on green, overlapped them, put them into a piece of video editing software, played the track, put on a couple of special effects, bang, had exactly the same result as going through the very complex piece of Adobe software. And so again, it was it exactly maximized my own opportunity for learning, because it was a challenge. I said, it has to be a different way, or an alternative way, not necessarily better way of doing it. And that's how I did it. So again, I knew I didn't know how to do it. I wanted to do it, and I saw some solutions, other people's knowledge, and I said, I must try and figure out a different way of doing this and see will this work. And lo and behold, bang, there it worked. I don't think I don't want to go back now. I won't. I'll mess up this presentation on you. So the importance of reflection, unless we make conscious and systematic efforts to critique our own practice, we will be unaware of how and when we are being discriminatory. We will not make use of knowledge developed by our own profession. If we're stubborn or big-headed, we don't use our what other people have already taught us or what they already know. If we don't tap into that reservoir, we will continue to repeat the same mistakes. Of course, because if you don't know when to stop and ask for help, in other words, our skills will be stagnant rather than develop. That's essentially the if we figure out that there's something not right about this, therefore we need to get some help, and I need to talk to people. Other people know more than I do, therefore I must ask, and have that humility to be able to have the confidence to ask for help, and that's important. And these are just the references that I referred to earlier on in the thing.